I think it's fascinating how last year we had already 200 megawatts of corporate renewable energy procurement deals happening in Alberta, totaling 400 million in private sector investment in Alberta. So those deals happened in Alberta. And I think it's something that is really important to understand. Why is this happening right now in Alberta? These kind of private sector investment in renewables in Canada is happening in Alberta right now. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what is the mechanism that allows that?
Yeah, so that's really the fact that we have a deregulated market in Alberta. One of the only, the only truly fully deregulated market across Canada. And so that allows buyers to go directly to a renewable energy developer. They don't need to get permission or go through a more complicated setup like you would in some of the other markets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you think about if you need to also remember an example on what deregulated market means, for me it's easy to think okay, in Alberta you can go to whichever liquor store. There's a plenitude of different liquor stores. You can buy your beer at the Beer Apprentice, all these different shops. But in Ontario you have to go to the LCBO. So this is the difference. You have here you can choose, and the electricity market and the liquor market are deregulated in Alberta, so this makes it able to make these kind of investments. So one other thing that I wanted to talk about with you, Sara, is the other market conditions or other conditions that make it right now Alberta a really good place to invest in, and why these projects are happening in Alberta.
Yeah, so in addition to, you can kind of think about the deregulated market as a necessary condition. And then there's, as you said, there's some sort of things that make Alberta an even better place to do that business. So one is that there is a lot of existing renewables in the market for people looking to buy. There are a lot of projects that are relatively advanced already and already in the connection queue. And so on the supply side, there's a lot to choose from. On the demand side, the price of electricity gets set by the supply-demand balance. And we have a couple of things that are pushing that, towards a tighter supply. So we have a lot of coal that is coming offline by 2030. And along with that, there's a forecast of a significant amount of, up to 12 gigawatts of new generation capacity that's required. And that's driving rising forward price curves such that the renewable generation is really cost competitive there. Obviously, right now in the midst of the pandemic, electricity demand here, like other places, is has taken a hit. But I think most people expect that there will be a recovery, coming out of that situation. Mm-hmm. And then also, if we look on the next slide at the map of Alberta, one of the things that folks may not be familiar with is the fact that we actually have really strong resources here. We have, some of the best sun and wind all across Canada. And that also helps, obviously, with keeping the prices competitive.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sara. And another thing that I think is also important to remember is when you think, going back to the emissions reduction goals that we've been talking about, the carbon targets that your company might be setting. When you think about the carbon intensity of the Alberta grid, is still relatively high compared to other provinces in Canada. So making a renewable energy project here is having a bigger impact on the reduction of emissions compared to other places across Canada. So this is another thing that you might want to have in mind when you have conversations with the internal stakeholders, and just good to understand that making a project here to reduce emissions within the grid has a higher impact than building a renewable energy project right now in Manitoba or BC, for example. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to just make sure that people remember is that right now, because of the conditions that we talked about, the regulation, the regulatory framework, all these projects are going to happen in Alberta. But this doesn't mean that as a buyer, you can be somewhere in Canada. It's about you can address your emissions across Canada through projects in Alberta. And this is something that we want to make sure that you remember. You can be based in Toronto. One of our founding members is RBC. So thinking about how you can address your emissions across Canada, this is an option. But remembering that the projects for now will mostly happen in Alberta. So I wanted to kind of end it here with borrowing from Sara's expertise. I wanted to thank you so much for kind of making sure we can, this is happening, bringing the BRC to Canada, having the vision to bring it to Canada. This is something that has started like 4 years ago, launched last year. So thank you, Sara, for being so visionary, bringing it here. And I'm going to let you drop off now and talk a little bit about what it means to be a BRC member. So thanks
for having me. Yeah, thanks for having me here today. Take care.
Bye.